Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a really fascinating business case study that challenges, well, absolutely everything we know about modern marketing. For years, oat milk was this purely niche product. Just picture it for a second, quietly sitting on the dusty bottom shelves of local health food stores, packaged in those overly earnest, kind of boring cartons that really only die-hard vegans seem to buy. And then came Oatly. They didn't just step into the market to sell a dairy alternative. No, they aggressively sold an entire anti-corporate movement. With their quirky, hand-drawn packaging and a completely self-deprecating brand voice, they captured the cultural zeitgeist like lightning in a bottle. But, as we'll see, that explosive, totally unprecedented growth set the stage for a massive collision between grassroots activism and global capitalism. So, here's the ultimate paradox we're diving into today. What actually happens when a brand built entirely on being a rebellious outsider suddenly has to play by the rules of big finance? It is the absolute core dilemma for any purpose-driven startup out there today. I mean, you want to change the world, right? But to change the world on a truly global scale, you need massive institutional resources. So the question is, can you actually secure those resources without losing the very soul of your brand in the process?
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the Rebel Milk Movement and the Purpose Marketing Playbook.
Think about traditional corporate dairy marketing for a second. It is always focused purely on taste, calcium, and physical health. You picture the idyllic green pastures, the happy cows, the pristine glass of milk poured at a family breakfast. It's safe, you know? It's traditional. But Oatly? They completely flipped the script. They used weird, quirky fonts, super conversational copy, and this activist persona that basically told consumers that cow's milk was just an outdated relic of a completely broken food system. They managed to take a simple, everyday grocery run and turn it into a loud political statement. When you tossed Oatly in your cart, you weren't just buying coffee creamer anymore, you were actively signaling to the world that you cared about the planet.
Now, what they were executing here is formally defined as purpose marketing. It's when you position a brand entirely around a social, environmental, or political cause to stand out and build this intense, almost cult-like consumer loyalty. And this works so incredibly well today because modern consumers increasingly vote with their wallets. We buy things to signal who we are and what we believe in. Oatly didn't just say, hey, our milk tastes better. They said, drinking our milk helps save the world. It is an absolute masterclass in brand differentiation.
And you know, brand voice has really become a calculated weapon in the modern market. Take Wendy's, for example. They realized they literally couldn't outspend McDonald's on TV ads, so what did they do? They started ruthlessly roasting people and their competitors on Twitter. That snark became a competitive asset that pulled in billions of free impressions. Or look at how Nando's uses a cheeky, rebellious personality to differentiate their restaurants. Oatly basically took this exact playbook but applied it to anti-corporate activism. This created a flawless cultural fit with an incredibly eco-conscious generation of millennials and Gen Z. They weren't just buying a beverage, they were buying an identity that perfectly aligned with their own deeply held values.
Which brings us to Section 2, the mainstream scaling paradox.
You guys remember the hypergrowth of Zoom during the pandemic, right? Almost overnight, the entire world needed their software. Well, they quickly realized that capturing lightning in a bottle is really only step one. When global demand suddenly crushes your servers, you have to scale at an agonizing speed. Oatly faced a very similar crisis but with physical goods, and actually that's way harder. You can't just spin up new digital servers for oat milk. When global demand depleted their inventory, they needed to build massive physical factories, secure thousands of tons of raw oats, and distribute a highly perishable product worldwide. You simply cannot rely on clever marketing to solve supply chain bottlenecks. You need hard, astronomical amounts of cash.
So, to fund this monumental global expansion, Oatly accepted a $200 million investment led by Blackstone. Now, Blackstone is a massive mainstream global investment firm, and they hold financial ties to various industries, some of which environmental activists consider to be highly controversial. Now, for a traditional legacy company, taking $200 million from a major private equity firm, that's just a normal Tuesday. It's totally standard business. But for a brand built entirely on an anti-corporate ethos, yeah, that's a different story.
For Oatly, this single strategic decision triggered an absolutely massive reaction. The mainstream investment acted as a catalyst that completely alienated their most loyal base. Think about it. The core fans, the very people who built the brand through word of mouth because they truly believed in its pure activist ethos, felt this intense emotional whiplash. They felt deeply betrayed, and the result was a severe reputation crisis. This wasn't just a minor PR hiccup. This is historically parallel to the deep, structural trust issues we saw when Wells Fargo was caught opening fake accounts, or, when United Airlines forcibly dragged a passenger off a plane. In those cases, the foundational trust consumers had in the institution was fundamentally shattered almost overnight. For Oatly, years of meticulously built-up trust were heavily damaged, all because their new financial reality clashed violently with their marketing promise.
Let's explore exactly why that happens in Section 3, the cultural fit crisis.
It's like this. When a brand's identity is built on a very specific stance, the market locks you into that identity. Take Abercrombie & Fitch. Their original stance was built on aggressive exclusivity. Basically, only the cool kids were supposed to wear it. But as modern societal values naturally shifted toward inclusivity, that foundation collapsed entirely. Or look at Victoria's Secret. They held such a rigid, specific stance on a very narrow standard of beauty that any failure to adapt, or any eventual attempt to pivot, was immediately called out by consumers as sheer hypocrisy. And over in the tech world with Palantir, their highly secretive, high-touch philosophy faced the brutal commercialization challenge of scaling into a publicly traded global empire. When you build your house on a highly specific ideological foundation, any necessary shift just to survive feels to the consumer like a painful, hypocritical trade-off. And honestly, that is exactly what happened here. The market reacted swiftly. Oatly's activist values felt fundamentally diluted by their new financial partners. The narrative completely shifted on them. They transitioned in the public eye from being this scrappy, independent rebel actively fighting the system to being a recognized, well-funded part of that exact same system.
All right, let's wrap this up with Section 4, Trust and Brand Purpose.
We can actually draw a direct line from this situation to the famous Chipotle food safety crisis. For years, Chipotle aggressively marketed their Food with Integrity campaign. They constantly boasted about ethically sourced meats and local vegetables. But when they suffered that widespread E. coli outbreak, absolutely nobody cared about ethical sourcing anymore. Customers just wanted to know if the food was going to make them sick. Once foundational consumer trust is fractured, every other marketing effort becomes entirely secondary. You can have the funniest social media manager, the coolest packaging, and the cleverest ads in the entire world, but if the underlying trust is broken, no amount of clever marketing can fix the immediate damage. You simply have to address the root issue.
Now, if we look at this impartially, there are two totally distinct yet highly logical perspectives to this conflict. On one side, you have the fan perspective. Taking big finance money was a sheer betrayal of Oatly's indie activist roots. To them, it felt like selling out to the very forces they were supposedly fighting. But on the other side, Oatly's defense was highly pragmatic. They argued that if you actually want to enact real global environmental change, you cannot stay small and niche forever. You actively need to pull mainstream institutional money away from harmful legacy industries and redirect it into sustainable ones. Essentially, to green the world, you have to use the world's money.
Both sides make a really compelling argument, right? However, due to rapidly changing consumer values where authenticity is just absolutely paramount, the corporate defense often struggles to land. Remember the Gillette toxic masculinity advertisement? A razor company tried to lecture the public on deeply complex social issues, and a massive backlash occurred simply because it felt entirely inauthentic for a shaving brand. The fundamental rule is this: when you use your brand to take a social stand, your customers are going to hold you to a drastically higher standard than they hold traditional companies. A standard dairy brand taking Blackstone money wouldn't even make the back page of the news. But for Oatly, it was front page headline news, simply because of the lofty expectations they themselves set.
There is this vital rule in modern marketing. Purpose is a double-edged sword. It can build a brand faster than any traditional ad campaign ever could, but it also creates a values-based debt that absolutely must be paid as the company scales. And honestly, that values-based debt is the key takeaway of this whole explainer. When you position yourself as a revolutionary, you borrow heavily against your activism to grow incredibly fast. But eventually, the interest rate on that debt gets pretty high, and the market always comes to collect.
So, what's the survival strategy moving forward? Oatly's journey serves as a crucial warning and a roadmap, presenting 3 non-negotiable tactics for every modern startup out there. First, you absolutely must explicitly acknowledge that values-based debt from day one of your marketing. Don't hide from it. Second, you have to elevate your talent capability, your PR, your marketing, your executive team to manage incredibly complex public optics. And third, you must build a highly resilient leadership strategy that is fully prepared for the inevitable day your brand's original, pure purpose collides head-on with the harsh, highly complex realities of the global market.
To wrap up our explainer today, I really want to leave you with a provocative thought. Think deeply about your own buying habits for a second. Can a brand truly stay radical and pure while being fueled by massive global investment firms? Or is some level of what critics call selling out just the inevitable, required price of admission for enacting actual, widespread global change. I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts on this paradox. Let us know in the comments if you think it's truly possible to scale a revolution without compromising. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep questioning the brands behind the products you buy.